Anthony Albanese has been accused of running away from key issues facing the Northern Territory, even as he ramps up his pre-election campaign blitz across Australia. The Prime Minister stopped in at a cattle farm in the Northern Territory before flying off to WA. But noticeably, there was a big omission. There was no stop in Alice Springs, a town which we know has been plagued by crime and youth violence, and where the locals are fed up and want some help. Joining me now to discuss this and a lot more is Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians, Jacinta Price. Jacinta, thank you so much for joining me. Do you believe that the Prime Minister has taken the easy road here by doing a little tourist stop at a cattle farm, but not talking to people in Alice about the real hard issues that they're confronting every day and every night?
Yeah, look, absolutely. Firstly, I will just say we call them cattle stations in the Northern Territory. I know the Prime Minister kept calling cattle farmers and cattle farms, but we're cattle stations and pastoralists out here and station owners. But however, look, he is absolutely taking the easy path. He always has. He always does when he comes to the Northern Territory. You know, if it's not an easy sort of trip, a visit where he's not going to be seen by very many people out in the middle of, you know, a very remote part of the Northern Territory, then it's, you know, it's usually somewhere like Garma, which is a Labor sort of love fest anyway and is really safe ground. You know, he's very reluctant and has been reluctant to actually speak to the locals on the ground. The other thing that our Prime Minister likes to do, and like what Labor love to do, is sit down with heads of organisations consistently, as opposed to the people that you know, are served by these organisations. And you're right, there is a lot still going on here in Alice Springs in terms of the crime and dysfunction. What I will say is that the new Country Liberal Party government, led by Leah Finocchiaro, are starting to make some changes, but they are identifying to our federal government what support they need in order to bring about more changes. Since they've come to power, they've in recent times been able to take 50 fugitives off our streets, you know, targeting those with outstanding warrants and that sort of thing, which is what the previous government failed to do.
And, you know, we are seeing these problems with youth crime, not just in NT, but Queensland, Victoria, but we're also seeing, I think, this trend with this government. It's becoming a bit of a habit for Prime Minister Albanese to always want the happy photo op, but not have to do the sort of the hard yards and hear from people who might not be happy with him. I know, as you say, there's been changes since the CLP government has come in, but what are you hearing from locals in Alice Springs about the Prime Minister's visit, or rather non-visit? Are they disappointed?
Yeah, look, they're absolutely disappointed. It's not just Alice Springs that are disappointed. It's Katherine, it's Tennant Creek, it's other towns in the Northern Territory that would love to be heard by the Prime Minister. You know, what we do know is that the Prime Minister seems to be going from places, you know, remote Queensland, now here, and it was only a very brief trip. As I said, you'll blink and miss it, and so we have. But evidently, you know, the Northern Territory, we've had an overwhelming result in our last territory election, so did Queensland. It feels as though he's now playing catch-up in places that he knows that he has to do a lot more work if Labor think they're going to try to win anything. But Territorians aren't fools. They're not happy. They're not just happy with the crime issue, but they're really unhappy with the cost of living crisis that's, you know, troubling for all Australians, but particularly so in the Northern Territory. A lot of small family businesses have had to shut down because of both those issues combined.
Yeah, and just to stick though with this idea about the crime and the new government, it seems that I understand the Albanese government has been shown up by the Northern Territory by not backing proposed reforms aimed at helping the declining situation in some of these places. Some of these proposals relate to Centrelink payments and royalty distribution arrangements, which are being hindered by Labor. Can you explain to our viewers more about what's going on with that and how, you know, again, they're all happy to do the fun stuff, but when it comes to actually backing real reform, not so much?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So there's been an ask to the federal government to change the day that welfare recipients receive their payments to coincide with those days where there are alcohol restrictions in place. So they're more likely to spend their money, getting that money on those days, and spend that money on things like food and necessities and clothing and bills and ensuring that children are being fed. It's a really simple reform that can be made quite quickly, and for some reason this government doesn't want to take those steps, which is beyond me. It's just a common sense approach to the matter, and to also consider the way in which royalties payments are delivered through the land councils. Now, this is something that I've brought up in the past about how I believe the land councils have a responsibility when it comes to the distribution of royalties as another passive form of welfare, because quite often when you get welfare recipients that receive huge sums of money, and a lot of those recipients are also those who have an issue with with alcohol abuse anyway, that a lot of that money is spent on alcohol. And then we usually have sort of an influx in alcohol-related crime and violence around those times. And if we had actually had an inquiry into land councils, as I've been calling ever since I got into Parliament, we would be able to see the impact of this particular issue on our most vulnerable within our communities. But Anthony Albanese and his government have denied over and over again the opportunity to have such an inquiry, which would be utilising our parliamentary system to allow for vulnerable people to be heard, so we can actually address these issues properly and look at, you know, what the reforms might look like when it comes to the distribution of royalties payments.
Absolutely right. Spot on. Jacinta Price, thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to seeing you out there on the campaign trail.